In this tutorial, we'll look at the useEffect hook. And how we'll illustrate this is by updating the application title. I've already added the title to the document, and essentially what should happen is, as I change the name here, I want it to update at the top there, the one that relates to the class. And when I change the one that relates to the hook, I want it to change the one that's labeled as hook up there. And that will help us illustrate a possible use case for the useEffect hook. Just like we've been doing before, we will look at how we would achieve this effect in classes and then look at how we would achieve the same thing in hooks. So in a class, if I want to create a side effect like that, I have to use lifecycle methods. So what I would do is in component did mount, you'll notice that I have conveniently created this set title property. Now it doesn't matter where it's coming from. All that we need to know is that it sets the property higher up in the tree. And so what we do is that inside of component did mount, we need to first get set title from the props. And then we can call set title, assigning, we'll create a template literal string from the name space surname. Now that means we also need to get those from the state. So I'll destructure them from the state, name and surname. And as we can see, when the component mounts, the name and the surname are already updated up there. But this doesn't update when I change those properties. And for that, we need to add this same logic to component did update. So because it's pretty much the exact same logic, I will copy that and put it down there. Change that to component did update. And now on first render, we get the default values, Tony Stark. And if I change this, it changes along. Similarly with the surname, it's listening to changes in the surname. Okay, so now that we've got that working, let's see how we would achieve the same thing inside of hooks. So in hooks, we have a hook called useEffect. And essentially, just like the name says, this is called to perform a side effect whenever something happens in the component. And how we would achieve what we just achieved in the class is to first get the title from get set title from the props, and then we can call set title in here, passing to it our template literal string with the name and the surname. We need to tell it where useEffect is coming from. It comes from React. And just like that, on initial render, we get those initial values. But without any extra effort, we get the edits when we change the inputs without needing to duplicate our logic. Now the useEffect hook takes a second parameter, which is a dependency array. When we leave it without any dependencies like this, this side effect is going to be called on every single render. So if we don't want that to happen on every single render, what we can do is to provide a dependency array. We have multiple options. First, we can leave the dependency array empty, and doing this makes it analogous to the component did mount. If we leave it like this, it will only be called once when the component first mounts and never again. And the reason for this is that there are no dependencies. So nothing is going to trigger a recall of this side effect. But if we want this side effect to be called anytime a specific variable changes, like in this case, we want the side effect to be called anytime the name or the surname changes, we can provide those variables in the dependency array and it will listen to that, which means it will now render the first time and every other time when the variables that it depends on change. So I'm going to add the name and the surname in there, and everything should still work the way that we expect. I'll refresh that. If I come in here, I change it and it changes up there. I'll just correct that. All right. Now, as we've been doing before, let's look at them side by side. Starting with the class. If we look at this, in the class, for us to achieve this functionality, we had to add these two methods, component did mount and component did update. And unfortunately, we are forced to duplicate this logic that is in component did mount inside of component did update and mirror it, because there is no way of putting all of that in one place. We're forced to do this. And so now we're forced to have two functions that have the exact same logic. And these things that have to do with updating the title of the application are forced to be in two different methods. Whereas if we look at the hooks world, everything goes into a single side effect. There is no repeated logic. There is no spreading related logic across multiple methods. Everything is in one place, and it is easier to understand, in my opinion. Next, I want us to look at how we would achieve creating subscriptions. Inside of a class, if we want to listen to a subscription, we subscribe to it inside of component did mount, and then we unsubscribe from it when the component unmounts. Now let's do that. Let's say we want to listen to the window width such that when the width of our window changes, we can update our UI with the value of that width. So we'll need a few additional things in our UI. I'll add a third row and I'll give it the label of width. And instead of an input, we just listen to a width variable, which doesn't exist yet, but we're going to place that in state. So call it width. And we need to go and edit in state width. And we will instantiate it to window.inner width. There we go. We have our third row, which is the width, and it's already gotten a value over there. Unfortunately, when we change the width, we don't get an update of the new width on our UI, and we need to fix that. Okay. And how we do that is by subscribing to changes in the window width when the component mounts. So inside of component did mount, I'm going to call window.add event listener, and it will listen to the resize event. And when that is called, we'll call a method which doesn't exist yet called handle resize. Now, similarly, so that we don't cause any memory leaks, when the component unmounts, we need to remove that subscription. So inside of component will unmount. I'm going to unsubscribe from that event. So window.remove event listener. Now we need to create our handle resize method. Handle resize. And this method just sets the state. So this dot set state, and it sets the width to window dot inner width. Okay, now when I first render, I get an update of the width, but as well, because we have an active listener, when the window width changes, our UI also updates with the new width every time. Now let's look at how we achieve the same thing in hooks. We still use the useEffect hook, so I'll create a new one. We don't have to put everything in a single side effect. We can have multiple side effects. And so because the width is not related to the name and the surname or setting of the title, we'll give it its own side effect. Inside of here, remember I said if we give an empty dependency array, that is the same as or similar to component did mount. So on component did mount, I want to do window.add event listener, and I'll listen for the resize event. When that happens, I want to call handle resize, which doesn't exist yet, but we'll create it. The useEffect hook returns a function within which we can unsubscribe for things. So that function that is returned will be called when the component is being unmounted. So the function is similar to component will unmount in the same way that the useEffect with an empty dependency array is similar to component did mount. So for our unsubscribe, we'll put it inside of the function that is returned by this useEffect. So window.remove event listener. We're removing the resize event, and the handler is handle resize. Now we need to create this handle resize. And because everything that deals with this event lives inside of this useEffect, we don't need to put the handler outside of it. The handler can live within the same scope where it will be used. So I'll declare it in there, handle resize, which equals a function that just sets the width to window dot inner width. Now we don't have that state yet, and we can edit. I'll just copy that and change the variable to width, and that becomes set width. This is a number, and we will initialize it to window dot inner width. Now we need it to display in our UI, so I'll add a third row with the label of width. It takes its value from width. Oh, this is not an input anymore. It just displays the width. And there we go. There's our UI. Now, because things are getting a little squashed, I'll zoom out one level. And we've achieved the same thing with a single useEffect. Now, on first load, we get the window width. And as the width changes, we also get updates to our UI. And we got all of that for free without having to create two methods. Now let's draw a comparison between these two implementations. First, let's look at the classes world. For us to achieve this, we had to make the subscription in component did mount and remove the subscription in component will amount. So we had to spread it across two lifecycle method, which brings about the first problem that we encountered again with the other side effects, that in classes we are forced to spread logic that is related across multiple lifecycle methods. And so for you to understand what the application is doing or what the component is doing, you need to jump around between those multiple methods to get the full picture of what is going on. And secondly, the initial logic, this that has to do with setting the title of the application, has nothing to do with the logic about the window width and updating the width and so forth. But because of the way that we handle side effects within classes, we are forced to put this logic all together in component did mount. And so you can start to imagine if there's multiple things that need to be done when the component mounts, this component did mount method can start to grow and get really big with multiple things that are not related to each other at all. And worse off, most of that logic will need to be mirrored or duplicated in component did update, with the subscriptions needing to be done in component will unmount. But if we look at hooks and how this is achieved within hooks, you'll notice that all of the things we need to achieve fit in a single useEffect hook. We make our subscription in that hook, and we unsubscribe in that same hook in the return function. And we also create our handler for that subscription within the same side effect. And therefore, there's no need for us to separate all of these things that are related to each other across multiple methods. And secondly, we were able to put all of these things in their own useEffect hook, which is separate from the useEffect hook that is linked to setting the application title. And so it's easy to follow along. Things that are related to each other are grouped together, and they are kept separate from things that don't relate to them. Now this tutorial is getting a little long, so I will separate it into two parts. As always, I've put the link to the repository in the description. You'll notice when you get there that each lesson is its own branch, and within the branch there is a start commit and there is a end commit, so that you can easily follow along. Let's meet in the next lesson.